You know, Brother Alvin is talking about renewing himself. Brother Alvin, you can absolutely 100% do it, brother. All it takes is the will. And we have the will because he's placed his will within us. It's not something you have to go and find. It's in us. Brother Alvin, while he was up here, he inspired me because he began to talk about order. And I never forget when we went to Hyde Park, Speaker's Corner, back in the day when we began down there.
Teach, brother, teach.
And Hyde Park is a very volatile place. Since going there, I've seen people get knocked out. I've seen people get pulled down off their platforms. I've seen all kinds of stuff happening in Hyde Park. I mean, you know, there's a lot of arguing and toing and froing and whatever. But maybe you haven't seen the violence that we have seen and witnessed down there. But things happen there. And it's like a free-for-all. And people tend to be very disrespectful to other people. And I never forget being there on occasion. And when we go there as members of the Nation of Islam, we insist on order. Order. So we lay out exactly what's going to happen to those who are there to listen. And we tell them what we're going to do, that we're going to speak for a certain amount of time. And then when we're finished speaking, we will answer your questions. But then there were Caucasians and others who were saying, no, this is Hyde Park. You can't tell us how to conduct ourselves. We're going to shout at you and we're going to ask you questions whenever we want. But we would totally and utterly ignore them. And we would do what we came to do, which is to lecture and then answer questions. And within a period of time, believe me, family, we brought order out of chaos. Because after a while, when it came to the nation, they would come and gather around before we even arrived. They'd be waiting.
Anticipating.
And it was beautiful, beloved.
Yes, sir.
So order is critically important.
Yes, sir.
And Brother Alvin also mentioned the fact of the disorder in the black community.
Yes.
And you know, make no mistake about it, beloved family, we're not talking about some small thing here. This is real. You know, you got to understand that the black community today is in total and utter disarray. We are a lawless people. See? And unfortunately, we live in a world where people tell lies as a matter of course in order to go along, to get along. So you're not going to find very many people who will be prepared to tell black people the truth. But the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, he will tell us truth regardless of the fact that we may not like it. He's not telling us truth to hurt us. He's telling us truth to allow us the opportunity to make a change. And those of us who claim to follow him, we have to do the same. One, we have to tell truth to ourselves. And we have to get the lawlessness out of ourselves and bring some order to this self. But then we have an obligation, if we are a civilized man and a civilized woman, what is the obligation of the civilized man? Yeah, to teach the uncivilized, beloved. Because our people, you say that to some black people, they're vexed. We mean uncivilized, because it's like a throwback to the white man saying that we're savages.
That's right.
But we ain't talking about what the white man has to say. He's the most uncivilized and the most savage of all.
That's right. That's right.
When you can build nuclear weapons and drop them on people, that's savagery, beloved. When you can drop tens of thousands of tons of TNT on men, women and children all over the globe and massacre them. When you can impose sanctions on whole nations and cause them not to be able to find medicine for their babies. That's savage, beloved. Now our savagery is like kindergarten stuff compared to that savagery. But nonetheless, the savagery that's among us, we must point it out. We can't let our people off the hook, making us think, all praises be to Allah. All praise is due to Allah. We can't allow our people to be in this false sense of security, like there's nothing wrong with us. There is something wrong with us, beloved. We've become a lawless people. Why? Why are we lawless? Because for 400 years, somebody imposed such a draconian, wicked system on us that we couldn't blink without being in danger of losing our life. And under that oppressive existence, when it's proclaimed you're all free now, the freed person can be forgiven for thinking that means free to do anything. And never ever again wanting to go under any kind of law. But that's a mistake, because in the universal order there is natural law.
That's right.
And even though Almighty God Allah has given to you and I as human beings free will, it doesn't mean free to do anything we choose. It means free to be a human being, to have ethics, to have morals, to have standards, to have boundaries and limits that we place on ourselves. Because it's not every activity that is righteous or good.
Come on. Teach.
Look, beloved, our subject matter, as it was last week, is self-improvement, the basis for community development. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, last week we went through some of the dictionary definitions of self. But the Honorable Elijah Muhammad asked the question, what is your own self? And as Muslims, we know the answer. The answer is a righteous Muslim. Now, again, if you say that to black people, generally, some of them will frown. You know, what do you mean? I'm not no Muslim. Well, you know, beloved family, your own self is a righteous Muslim. You know, sometimes we get disturbed by the word righteous. Do you know the word righteous simply means to be right? I mean, who among us today wants to be wrong? If somebody comes to you and they say to you, you are wrong, do you readily accept that? Do you readily embrace wrong? Nobody does that, beloved. Everybody, immediately you might want to make another pronouncement to demonstrate to the person, no, I'm not wrong, this is my reason, or this is why, or this is the reality. But you will do something, you will say something to try to demonstrate that you are in fact right. Because it's the nature of the human being to be right. Did you know that your brain is designed by Almighty God Allah to think right?
Right. Come on. That's right.
And when we do wrong continuously, we actually start to go against what's called the grain of the brain.
That's right.
And we create problems within ourselves when we think right and speak, when we think wrong and do wrong and behave wrong.
Come sit, bro.
Look, beloved, your own self is a righteous Muslim.
That's right.
All it means, beloved, is that your nature is to be right. And, you know, it's unfortunate, but many of us live a lifestyle that's diametrically opposed to our nature. we find ourselves every day doing things that we know are wrong. Think about it. I don't want you to look at anybody else, just look at yourself. I'm looking at myself. A Muslim, beloved, for those who don't know, is one who submits his or her will entirely to do the will of God. Now again, you know, some of us, what does that mean? What does it mean to submit your will entirely to do the will of Almighty God Allah? Beloved, have you ever listened to that small voice within yourself? I hope nobody's small voice in here has been so stilled that it's no longer audible to us. As an aside, if you fast, a prolonged fast, 5, 7, 10 days, if you're dull here, if you're not able to think well, if you're constantly distracted by things and you're unable to concentrate and focus, if you do a fast like that, it clears up a lot of the dullness. It allows you to become sharp in your thinking again, and it allows you to properly hear what's going on within, and you can actually hear the voice again. The voice is always there, but we have to be careful that often some of our activity will dull or still the voice. If we're taking drugs and if we're taking unnatural foods into our systems, things of this nature stills or dulls the voice. So I'm just trying to explain to you how, when I'm talking about this small voice within, if it's something alien to you, again, you might want to think about fasting. You might want to think about rekindling the voice, because the voice is natural to every human being. That voice, if you study our study guide 1, that voice is the voice of God within. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan teaches us constantly, over and over again, to look to the leader within. And the leader within is God Himself. And if you listen to that small voice within, that voice will never ever lead you astray.
That's right.
That voice is the will of God.
That's right.
And every human being by nature is supposed to hear that voice and to obey that voice. That voice is never wrong. But once we start to ignore that voice and go contrary to that voice, then this is where we get into all of our problems.
That's right.
He gives us free will, but He doesn't leave us to blindly wander. He also gives us guidance from within. But we have to be sensitive enough to be able to hear that voice from within.